The morning sun cast long shadows across the Parris Island parade deck as Private Sarah Chun stood at attention, her dress blue uniform crisp despite the humidity that hung over the South Carolina marshlands. Around her, fellow Marines celebrated their graduation from boot camp, their faces beaming with pride as they prepared to receive their eagle, globe, and anchor. But Sarah's eyes remained fixed on a single empty chair in the reviewing stand, the chair that should have held her drill instructor, Staff Sergeant Martinez, who had recommended her dismissal just 3 weeks before graduation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was here at all. Most recruits who faced a disciplinary review board never made it back to the platoon. They were sent home quietly, their dreams of becoming Marines reduced to a brief entry in their military records. Sarah had been different. She had fought the dismissal, challenged the decision, and somehow convinced the commanding officer to give her one final chance. But that chance came with conditions that made her presence here feel more like a punishment than a victory. Her uniform bore no leadership insignia, while her former squadmates wore the chevrons of squad leaders and the distinctive markings of honor graduates. Sarah's sleeves remained bare. She had been stripped of every leadership position she had earned during the grueling 13 weeks of training. The other recruits barely acknowledged her presence, their conversations flowing around her like water around a stone. She had become invisible, a reminder of what happened when someone pushed too hard against the established order. 3 weeks earlier, the obstacle course at Parris Island had been shrouded in the pre-dawn darkness that made everything appear more threatening than it actually was. Sarah Chun had been leading her squad through the final navigation exercise of their training cycle, a complex nighttime operation that tested everything they had learned about tactics, teamwork, and decision-making under pressure. The course was designed to push recruits to their absolute limits, forcing them to make critical decisions while exhausted, stressed, and operating in unfamiliar terrain. Sarah had always excelled at these challenges. Her small frame, which some instructors initially viewed as a disadvantage, actually gave her significant advantages in speed and agility. She could navigate tight spaces that larger recruits struggled with, and her endurance seemed limitless. More importantly, she had an intuitive understanding of tactical movement that impressed even the most experienced drill instructors. While other recruits focused on individual performance, Sarah naturally thought in terms of team coordination and mission success. The exercise that night was particularly challenging. Each squad had been given a series of objectives to complete within a strict time limit, but the real test wasn't the physical challenges themselves. It was how the squad leaders would adapt when the unexpected occurred, how they would balance competing priorities, and whether they could maintain unit cohesion under extreme pressure. Sarah's squad had been performing flawlessly, moving through each checkpoint with precision and efficiency that reflected months of intensive training. The first sign of trouble came when they reached the river crossing checkpoint. The exercise planners had set up a rope bridge system that required precise coordination between team members. One person would act as the anchor while others crossed, then the roles would reverse. It was a standard drill that every recruit had practiced dozens of times. But the darkness and time pressure added layers of complexity that transformed a routine exercise into a genuine test of leadership. Sarah's squad was making excellent time. They had completed the first 4 objectives ahead of schedule and were positioned to achieve one of the best overall scores in their training company. But as they approached the rope bridge, Sarah noticed something that made her pause. The safety line that was supposed to secure the crossing system was frayed, showing signs of wear that hadn't been visible during daylight inspections. Under normal training conditions, this might not have been a serious concern, but the recent rains had swollen the river, and the current was stronger than usual. Protocol was clear in these situations. When safety equipment showed signs of damage, the exercise should be halted immediately while instructors evaluated the situation. But Sarah also knew that stopping the exercise would mean automatic failure for her squad. They would lose weeks of hard work and preparation, and their training scores would suffer significantly. More importantly, she believed she could modify their crossing technique to compensate for the equipment issues without compromising safety. Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her Marine Corps career. Instead of reporting the frayed safety line, she quietly adjusted her squad's approach to the crossing. She positioned herself as the primary anchor point, using her own body weight and positioning to compensate for the weakened equipment. She instructed her team members to cross one at a time instead of the standard two-person technique, reducing the stress on the compromised rope system. The modification took longer, but it allowed them to complete the crossing safely while maintaining their competitive position in the exercise. The crossing went perfectly. Every member of Sarah's squad made it across the river without incident, and they continued through the remaining objectives with the same precision and efficiency they had demonstrated throughout the night. When the exercise concluded at dawn, Sarah's squad had achieved the highest overall score in their training company, completing all objectives within the time limit while maintaining perfect safety standards. The other squad leaders congratulated her on an outstanding performance, and even the drill instructor seemed impressed with her team's coordination and tactical execution. But Sarah's satisfaction was short-lived. During the post-exercise debriefing, Staff Sergeant Martinez reviewed the night's activities with particular attention to decision-making and adherence to safety protocols. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When he reached the river crossing checkpoint, his expression darkened. The safety inspection that morning had revealed the frayed rope that Sarah had noticed but failed to report. What had seemed like exceptional leadership during the exercise now appeared to be a dangerous disregard for established procedures. The confrontation that followed was unlike anything Sarah had experienced during her time at Parris Island. Staff Sergeant Martinez was known for his intensity and demanding standards, but he had always been fair in his assessments. This time, however, his anger seemed personal. He accused Sarah of recklessly endangering her squad members, of prioritizing competitive success over Marine Corps values, and of demonstrating the kind of judgment that had no place in military leadership. The fact that no one had been injured was irrelevant, he argued. The fact that her modifications had actually improved safety was beside the point. She had violated protocol, and in the Marine Corps, protocol existed for reasons that individual Marines were not qualified to second-guess. Sarah tried to explain her reasoning, to describe how she had carefully analyzed the situation and implemented modifications that actually reduced risk while allowing the mission to continue. But Staff Sergeant Martinez wasn't interested in explanations. He had seen enough, he said, to know that Sarah lacked the discipline and judgment required for Marine Corps leadership. Her academic scores and physical performance were irrelevant if she couldn't follow simple safety procedures. He was recommending her immediate dismissal from the training program. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of administrative proceedings and formal reviews. Sarah found herself facing a disciplinary board composed of senior officers who examined every aspect of her training record. They interviewed her squad members, reviewed exercise footage, and analyzed the technical details of the river crossing incident. Throughout the process, Sarah maintained that her actions had been tactically sound and had actually improved safety margins. She presented detailed calculations showing how her modifications had reduced stress on the equipment while maintaining operational effectiveness. But the board wasn't primarily concerned with technical details. They were focused on a more fundamental question about military discipline and the chain of command. Even if Sarah's tactical modifications had been superior to the standard procedure, she had made that determination unilaterally without consulting her instructors. She had decided that her judgment was better than established protocols, and that kind of thinking was incompatible with military service. The Marine Corps depended on absolute adherence to orders and procedures, especially in high-stress situations where individual initiative could compromise unit cohesion. The testimony of her squad members was particularly damaging. While they acknowledged that Sarah had kept them safe and had led them to an exceptional performance, they also admitted that they had been unaware of the equipment issues. Sarah had made critical decisions about their safety without informing them of the risks involved. From the board's perspective, this suggested a pattern of decision-making that prioritized personal achievement over transparency and team communication. Staff Sergeant Martinez's testimony was the most damning. He described Sarah as technically proficient, but fundamentally unsuited for leadership positions. Her tendency to question established procedures and her willingness to modify tactics without authorization demonstrated a lack of respect for military authority that would only become more problematic as she advanced in rank. He recommended that she be dismissed from the program immediately and barred from re-enlisting in any military service. But Sarah had one unexpected advocate on the disciplinary board. Lieutenant Colonel Williams, the senior reviewing officer, had spent considerable time analyzing the technical aspects of the river crossing incident. His own background in combat engineering gave him insights into tactical decision-making that the other board members lacked. While he agreed that Sarah had violated protocol, he was impressed by the sophistication of her tactical analysis and the effectiveness of her modifications. Her approach had actually been superior to the standard procedure in several important respects. More significantly, Lieutenant Colonel Williams had noticed patterns in Sarah's training record that suggested her dismissal might be premature. Her physical training scores were consistently among the highest in her training company. Her academic performance was exceptional, particularly in subjects requiring analytical thinking and problem-solving. Her peer evaluations were overwhelmingly positive, with other recruits consistently rating her as one of the most effective squad leaders in their platoon. The river crossing incident appeared to be an isolated example of poor judgment, rather than part of a broader pattern of disciplinary problems. The board's final decision reflected this divided assessment. Sarah would not be dismissed from the training program, but she would face significant disciplinary action that would affect the remainder of her time at Parris Island. She was stripped of all leadership positions and would complete her training as a basic recruit without opportunities for advancement or recognition. She would be required to repeat several training modules to demonstrate proper adherence to protocols. Most importantly, her training record would reflect the disciplinary action, potentially affecting her future assignments and career progression. The announcement of the board's decision created an uncomfortable atmosphere within Sarah's training platoon. Her fellow recruits weren't sure how to respond to someone who had simultaneously achieved exceptional performance and faced serious disciplinary action. Some viewed her as a cautionary example of what happened when someone pushed too hard against established boundaries. Others saw her as someone who had been unfairly punished for demonstrating exactly the kind of initiative and tactical thinking that the Marine Corps claimed to value. Sarah herself struggled to process the mixed signals she was receiving. On one hand, she was grateful to remain in the training program and still have the opportunity to earn her Eagle, Globe, and Anchor. On the other hand, the disciplinary action felt like a fundamental rejection of everything she believed about leadership and tactical excellence. She had kept her squad safe while achieving superior results, but the Marine Corps seemed more concerned with her methods than her outcomes. The weeks that followed were among the most difficult of Sarah's life. She had to watch as other recruits took over the leadership positions she had earned through months of hard work and superior performance. She had to endure remedial training, sessions that covered material she had already mastered. Most painfully, she had to accept that her training record would forever reflect the disciplinary action, regardless of how well she performed in her remaining time at Parris Island. But Sarah discovered something unexpected during this period of enforced humility. Without the pressure of leadership responsibilities and competitive rankings, she was able to focus more intensively on the fundamental skills that made Marines effective. She spent extra time on the rifle range, perfecting her marksmanship until she could consistently achieve scores that few recruits ever reached. She used her mandatory remedial physical training sessions to push her endurance and strength to new levels. She studied tactical manuals and military history with an intensity that impressed even her instructors. Most importantly, Sarah began to understand that her dismissal from leadership positions had revealed something crucial about her own motivations and goals. She had been so focused on excelling within the existing system that she had lost sight of what drew her to the Marine Corps in the first place. She wanted to serve her country and protect others, not just accumulate leadership positions and recognition. The disciplinary action had stripped away the external validation she had been seeking and forced her to confront what really mattered to her. The other recruits gradually began to notice changes in Sarah's approach to training. She became more collaborative, more willing to help struggling teammates even when it didn't benefit her own scores. She volunteered for the most difficult and unpleasant assignments without complaint. She demonstrated a level of commitment and professionalism that earned respect even from those who had initially viewed her disciplinary action as justified. Her instructors began to see glimpses of the leadership potential that had made her so effective before the river crossing incident. But the most significant change was in Sarah's relationship with Staff Sergeant Martinez. The drill instructor, who had recommended her dismissal, began to observe her more closely, looking for signs that she had learned from the disciplinary action. He noticed her improved teamwork, her willingness to accept correction, and her renewed focus on fundamental Marine Corps values. While he never publicly acknowledged these changes, he began to create opportunities for Sarah to demonstrate her abilities in low-stakes situations. As graduation approached, Sarah found herself in an unusual position. Her official training record marked her as someone who had faced significant disciplinary action and had been stripped of leadership opportunities. But her actual performance during the final weeks of training had been exceptional by any measure. She had achieved the highest scores in her platoon on the final physical fitness test, the final rifle qualification, and the comprehensive written examination that tested everything from military history to tactical doctrine. The contradiction between her official status and her actual performance created an awkward dynamic during the final weeks of training. Sarah was clearly one of the most capable recruits in her platoon, but she would graduate without any of the recognition or leadership positions that typically accompanied such performance. Her fellow recruits knew she deserved better, but the disciplinary action made it impossible for the instructors to acknowledge her achievements publicly. The final navigation exercise of their training cycle provided one last opportunity for Sarah to demonstrate her capabilities. Unlike the nighttime river crossing that had led to her disciplinary action, this exercise was conducted in broad daylight with full instructor supervision. Each recruit was required to complete an individual course that tested navigation skills, physical endurance, and tactical decision-making. The course was designed to be challenging but achievable for anyone who had successfully completed the training program. Sarah approached the final exercise with a combination of determination and resignation. She knew she could excel at the physical and technical challenges, but she also knew that exceptional performance wouldn't change her official status or remove the disciplinary action from her record. She was running for personal satisfaction rather than external recognition, and that freedom allowed her to perform at a level that surprised even her most demanding instructors. The final exercise course covered 12 miles of varied terrain including forests, hills, streams, and urban simulation areas. Recruits were required to navigate between checkpoints using only a compass and topographic map, complete specific tasks at each location, and finish within a strict time limit. The course record had been set 3 years earlier by a recruit, who later became a distinguished officer in the force reconnaissance community, and most recruits considered it essentially unbreakable. Sarah completed the course in a time that shattered the existing record by more than 15 minutes. Her navigation was flawless, her checkpoint tasks were executed with precision and efficiency, and her overall time reflected a level of physical conditioning and tactical execution that impressed even the most experienced instructors. But perhaps more importantly, she demonstrated the kind of disciplined adherence to procedures that had been lacking during the river crossing incident months earlier. She followed every protocol exactly, consulted with checkpoint supervisors when appropriate, and prioritized safety over speed throughout the course. The performance was so exceptional that Lieutenant Colonel Williams personally reviewed the exercise results to ensure their accuracy. Sarah's time was indeed legitimate, and her execution had been technically flawless by every measure. But the circumstances of her disciplinary action made it impossible to acknowledge her achievement in the traditional ways. She would graduate from boot camp as a basic Marine without recognition or fanfare, despite having achieved something that no recruit had accomplished in years. As Sarah stood on the parade deck during the graduation ceremony, watching her former squadmates receive their leadership recognition and academic awards, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The disciplinary action had cost her the external validation she had once sought, but it had also taught her something more valuable about what it meant to serve. She had learned that true leadership wasn't about accumulating positions and recognition, but about maintaining standards and taking care of others regardless of personal cost. The empty chair in the reviewing stand belonged to Staff Sergeant Martinez, who had been unexpectedly transferred to another assignment just days before graduation. Sarah never learned whether his departure was related to her case or simply the normal rotation of training personnel. But his absence felt symbolic of the unresolved tensions that surrounded her graduation. She had proven herself capable of exceptional performance while adhering to strict protocols, but the disciplinary action from months earlier continued to define how others viewed her potential and character. After the ceremony, as families celebrated with their newly graduated Marines, Sarah found herself standing alone near the edge of the parade deck. She had achieved her goal of earning the Eagle, Globe, and Anchor, but the victory felt incomplete. She was a Marine, but she was also someone whose career had been fundamentally shaped by a single moment of tactical decision-making that others had interpreted as insubordination. The question that haunted her was whether she would ever have the opportunity to prove that her approach to leadership and tactical thinking could be valuable to the Marine Corps, or whether the disciplinary action would forever limit her potential for advancement and meaningful service. The sun was setting over the South Carolina marshlands, casting the same long shadows that had marked the beginning of her day. But everything had changed in the hours between morning formation and evening graduation. Sarah Chun was no longer a recruit facing an uncertain future. She was a United States Marine, carrying both the pride of her achievement and the burden of questions that only time and future service could answer. The Marine Corps Recruit Depot at Camp Pendleton buzzed with the controlled chaos of advanced training as Sarah Chun reported for her first assignment as a newly graduated Marine. The California sun beat down on the sprawling base where thousands of Marines honed their skills in everything from urban warfare to desert survival. Sarah's orders had assigned her to the 2nd Battalion, 1st Marine Regiment, a unit with a distinguished combat history and a reputation for excellence that matched her own ambitions for military service. But the reality of her assignment was far different from what she had expected. Instead of joining a rifle company or specialized unit where her tactical skills might be valued, Sarah found herself assigned to the base logistics office, processing supply requisitions and maintaining equipment inventories. Her supervisor, Gunnery Sergeant Robert Torres, made it clear from their first meeting that her presence was both temporary and unwelcome. Torres was a career Marine with 22 years of service, most of it spent in administrative roles that kept the complex machinery of military logistics functioning smoothly. He had seen hundreds of young Marines pass through his office over the years, and he had developed a keen ability to identify those who would succeed in the military bureaucracy and those who would struggle against its constraints. Sarah's training record, with its combination of exceptional performance and disciplinary action, marked her as someone who would likely cause more problems than she solved. The work itself was mind-numbing in its repetitiveness. Sarah spent her days cataloging spare parts, updating computer databases, and processing paperwork that seemed to multiply exponentially, regardless of how efficiently she completed each task. The office environment was a stark contrast to the physical challenges and tactical complexity of boot camp. Instead of testing her endurance and decision-making abilities, her daily routine consisted of data entry and filing that required no particular skill or creativity. Her fellow Marines in the logistics office were pleasant enough, but they seemed content with work that Sarah found increasingly frustrating. They had found comfortable niches within the military bureaucracy, positions that offered predictable schedules, minimal physical demands, and clear advancement paths for those willing to master the intricacies of military administration. For someone who had joined the Marine Corps seeking challenge and meaningful service, the logistics office felt like professional exile. The frustration was compounded by Sarah's awareness that her assignment was essentially punitive. Marines with clean training records and strong leadership evaluations were typically assigned to operational units, where they could develop their tactical skills and gain meaningful experience. Those with disciplinary issues or questionable judgment were often assigned to administrative roles where they could contribute to the mission without being placed in positions of significant responsibility. Sarah understood the logic, but that didn't make the daily reality any easier to accept. 3 months into her assignment, Sarah had become known throughout the logistics office for her exceptional efficiency and attention to detail. She could process supply requisitions faster than anyone else in the department, and her error rate was virtually zero. But her supervisors also noticed her obvious dissatisfaction with the work and her tendency to ask questions about procedures that seemed perfectly adequate to everyone else. She wanted to understand not just what she was supposed to do, but why particular approaches had been chosen and whether alternative methods might be more effective. This curiosity initially annoyed Gunnery Sergeant Torres, who viewed Sarah's questions as implicit criticism of established procedures. But over time, he began to recognize that her suggestions often had merit. Her background in tactical training gave her insights into operational requirements that career administrators sometimes overlooked. When she pointed out inefficiencies in the supply chain or suggested modifications to inventory procedures, her recommendations were typically sound and potentially valuable. The relationship between Sarah and Torres began to evolve as he realized that her dissatisfaction wasn't rooted in laziness or insubordination, but in a genuine desire to contribute meaningfully to the mission. She wasn't questioning procedures out of arrogance, but because she understood how administrative efficiency could directly impact operational readiness. Her tactical training had taught her to think in terms of mission requirements and resource optimization, perspectives that were valuable even in administrative contexts. The first real test of this evolving relationship came when Torres was tasked with organizing the logistics support for a major training exercise involving multiple battalions and thousands of Marines. The exercise was designed to simulate extended combat operations in desert conditions, requiring complex coordination of food, water, ammunition, medical supplies, and equipment maintenance across a vast training area. Previous exercises had been plagued by supply shortages, communication failures, and transportation bottlenecks that compromised training effectiveness and potentially dangerous safety implications. Torres had been struggling with the planning requirements for weeks, trying to balance competing demands from different units while ensuring that critical supplies reached the right locations at the right times. The traditional approach involved establishing centralized supply points and requiring units to send vehicles to collect needed materials, but this method had proven inadequate for the scale and complexity of the upcoming exercise. Transportation. Assets were limited, distances were substantial, and the communication systems required for coordination were often unreliable in the remote training areas. Sarah had been observing Torres's planning efforts and had noticed several potential improvements that might address the recurring problems. Her tactical training had included extensive work on supply line management and resource distribution under field conditions. She understood how to prioritize critical needs, optimize transportation routes, and establish redundant systems that could function even when primary communication links failed. But she had learned to be cautious about offering unsolicited advice, especially given her disciplinary history and administrative status. The breakthrough came when Torres, frustrated by another failed planning session, directly asked Sarah for her thoughts on the logistics challenges. He had noticed her attention to his work and was curious whether her tactical background might offer useful perspectives. Sarah's response surprised him with its sophistication and practical applicability. She suggested a decentralized approach that would position smaller supply caches closer to operational areas, reducing transportation requirements while improving response times. She proposed communication protocols that would function effectively even with degraded equipment, and she identified critical supplies that should be pre-positioned to avoid last-minute shortages. More importantly, Sarah's suggestions were backed by detailed analysis that demonstrated her understanding of both operational requirements and administrative constraints. She had calculated transportation times, fuel consumption, personnel requirements, and equipment needs with precision that reflected months of careful observation and study. Her recommendations weren't theoretical improvements, but practical modifications that could be implemented with existing resources and personnel. Torres was impressed enough to include several of Sarah's suggestions in his final planning submission, though he was careful not to identify her as the source of the innovations. Military bureaucracy was often suspicious of ideas that originated from junior personnel, especially those with questionable disciplinary records. But the Exercise Planning Committee approved the modified approach, and Torres found himself responsible for implementing logistics procedures that were largely based on Sarah's tactical insights. The exercise itself was scheduled to run for 3 weeks across several thousand square miles of California desert. Participating units would face simulated combat scenarios, equipment failures, communication challenges, and supply disruptions designed to test their adaptability and resilience under realistic field conditions. The logistic support had to be invisible when everything worked correctly, but robust enough to handle unexpected problems without compromising safety or training objectives. Sarah's role in the exercise was initially limited to administrative support from the main base, processing supply requests and updating inventory records as materials moved through the distribution system. But Torres had quietly arranged for her to participate in the advance reconnaissance that would determine final supply cache locations and communication node positioning. He wanted someone with tactical training to verify that the planned logistics approach would actually function under field conditions. The reconnaissance mission provided Sarah with her first meaningful field assignment since graduating from boot camp. Working with a small team of experienced Marines, she spent 4 days surveying the training area, identifying optimal locations for supply points, and testing communication equipment under realistic conditions. Her tactical knowledge proved invaluable for understanding how operational units would actually move through the terrain and what kinds of support they would need at different phases of the exercise. But the reconnaissance also revealed potential problems that hadn't been apparent during the planning phase. Some of the proposed supply cache locations were vulnerable to the flash floods that occasionally swept through desert washes during sudden rainstorms. Others were positioned too far from reliable water sources, creating unnecessary hardships for the Marines who would have to transport heavy equipment across difficult terrain. Most significantly, the communication plan assumed line-of-sight connectivity that would be blocked by ridgelines and rock formations that weren't adequately represented on the maps used for planning. Sarah's recommendations for addressing these issues demonstrated both tactical sophistication and practical problem-solving ability. She suggested alternative cache locations that would be more secure and accessible. She proposed modifications to the communication plan that would utilize natural terrain features to improve signal coverage. She identified equipment requirements that had been overlooked during the initial planning process. Her analysis was thorough, practical, and based on first-hand observation rather than theoretical assumptions. Torres incorporated most of Sarah's recommendations into the final exercise plan, again without identifying her as the source of the improvements. But he also made a decision that would significantly impact Sarah's career trajectory. He requested that she be assigned to the forward logistics team that would manage supply operations during the exercise itself. This assignment would place her in a position where her tactical skills could be utilized directly, and where her performance could be observed by senior officers who might influence her future assignments. The request was unusual enough to attract attention from battalion leadership. Sarah's disciplinary record made her an unlikely candidate for important field assignments, and her administrative status suggested that she lacked the experience and judgment required for complex operations. But Torres argued persuasively that her tactical training and demonstrated analytical abilities made her valuable for the specialized requirements of desert logistics support. After considerable discussion, the request was approved with the understanding that Sarah's performance would be closely monitored throughout the exercise. The exercise began with the kind of controlled chaos that characterized large-scale military training events. Thousands of Marines moved through assembly areas conducting final equipment checks and receiving briefings on their assigned missions. Helicopter operations filled the air with dust and noise as units were transported to their initial positions across the vast training area. Radio networks crackled with communication traffic as commanders coordinated the complex choreography of simulated combat operations. Sarah found herself assigned to Forward Operating Base Delta, a temporary installation positioned at the center of the training area where logistics personnel could coordinate supply operations and respond to unexpected requirements. The base consisted of little more than camouflage tents, communication equipment, and vehicle parking areas, but it served as the nerve center for supporting thousands of Marines spread across hundreds of square miles of desert terrain. Official duties involved monitoring supply levels, processing requests for additional materials, and coordinating transportation assets to ensure that critical needs were met promptly. But the tactical complexity of the exercise created situations that went far beyond routine administrative procedures. Units were constantly moving, communication links were frequently disrupted, and operational requirements changed rapidly as scenarios evolved. Effective logistics support required constant adaptation and creative problem-solving that tested every aspect of Sarah's military training. The first major challenge came on the third day of the exercise when a simulated helicopter crash created an immediate requirement for medical evacuation and emergency supplies. The scenario was designed to test unit responses to unexpected casualties, but it also created complex logistics problems that threatened to disrupt the broader exercise. Timeline. Medical personnel and equipment had to be transported quickly to the crash site, while maintaining support for other operations that were continuing simultaneously across the training area. Sarah's tactical training proved invaluable for coordinating the emergency response. She understood how to prioritize competing requirements, optimize transportation routes, and establish communication protocols that could function effectively even with degraded equipment. Her recommendations for managing the medical evacuation were implemented quickly and effectively, minimizing disruption to other training activities while ensuring that simulated casualties received appropriate care. But it was her handling of a subsequent crisis that really demonstrated her potential value to the organization. On the 5th day of the exercise, a major sandstorm disrupted helicopter operations and severed several critical communication links, isolating multiple units from their supply lines. Normal logistics procedures would have required waiting for improved weather conditions and restored communications before attempting resupply operations. But several units were facing critical shortages of water and medical supplies that couldn't wait for ideal conditions. Sarah recognized that the situation required abandoning standard procedures in favor of adaptive approaches that could function under degraded conditions. She organized ground transportation convoys that could navigate to isolated units using dead reckoning and compass navigation when GPS systems failed. She established relay communication points that could maintain contact even when primary networks were down. Most importantly, she prioritized supply loads to ensure that the most critical needs were met, even if secondary requirements had to be deferred. The improvised logistics operation was successful beyond anyone's expectations. All isolated units received critical supplies within acceptable timeframes. Communication links were restored more quickly than anticipated, and normal operations resumed without significant disruption to the overall exercise timeline. Sarah's leadership during the crisis had been instrumental in preventing what could have been a serious training failure with potential safety implications. Colonel Patricia Hawkins, the exercise commander, took notice of the exceptional logistics performance during what should have been a crisis situation. Her investigation into how the challenges had been managed so effectively led her directly to Sarah's innovative approaches and tactical decision-making. This was particularly significant because Colonel Hawkins had extensive combat experience and understood the critical importance of adaptive logistics support under real-world conditions. The conversation between Colonel Hawkins and Sarah that followed was unlike any interaction Sarah had experienced since joining the Marine Corps. Instead of focusing on her disciplinary record or administrative status, Hawkins was interested in understanding her tactical thinking and problem-solving methodology. She wanted to know how Sarah had analyzed the crisis situation, what factors had influenced her decision-making, and how she had developed such sophisticated understanding of logistics operations despite her limited experience in administrative roles. Sarah's responses impressed Hawkins with their clarity and sophistication. Her approach to the crisis had been based on sound tactical principles, adapted creatively to unusual circumstances. She had correctly identified the most critical requirements, developed practical solutions that could be implemented with available resources, and maintained operational security throughout the emergency response. Her performance demonstrated exactly the kind of adaptive leadership that the Marine Corps needed for modern combat operations. But Colonel Hawkins also discovered the details of Sarah's disciplinary action during boot camp and the circumstances that had led to her assignment. In logistics, the parallels between the river crossing incident and her performance during the exercise were striking. In both cases, Sarah had modified standard procedures to address unusual circumstances, and in both cases her adaptations had actually improved safety and effectiveness. The difference was that the exercise environment had provided opportunities to demonstrate the value of her approach, while the training environment had only recognized the protocol violations. This discovery prompted Colonel Hawkins to conduct a more thorough review of Sarah's complete military record. What she found was a pattern of exceptional performance, combined with occasional conflicts with authority figures who valued compliance over innovation. Sarah's tactical capabilities were clearly superior to most Marines at her level, but her tendency to think independently sometimes put her at odds with supervisors who preferred predictable adherence to established procedures. The review also revealed that Sarah's current assignment in logistics was essentially wasted potential. Her analytical abilities and tactical training were being utilized for routine, administrative tasks that could be performed adequately by Marines with far less capability. Meanwhile, operational units were struggling with logistics, challenges that could benefit significantly from exactly the kind of innovative thinking that Sarah had demonstrated during the exercise. Colonel Hawkins faced a decision that would significantly impact Sarah's career trajectory. She could acknowledge Sarah's exceptional performance during the exercise while allowing her to continue in her current administrative assignment, or she could take the more unusual step of recommending Sarah for reassignment to an operational unit where her capabilities could be utilized more effectively. The second option carried risks, given Sarah's disciplinary history, but it also offered the potential for significant returns if Sarah could maintain her performance levels in more challenging environments. The decision was complicated by the broader organizational dynamics within the Marine Corps. Military bureaucracy often functioned most smoothly when personnel remained in clearly defined roles that matched their official qualifications and status. Sarah's combination of exceptional capability and questionable discipline made her difficult to categorize within traditional frameworks. Promoting someone with a disciplinary record could send problematic signals about the importance of following established procedures, but failing to utilize exceptional talent was also wasteful and potentially damaging to organizational effectiveness. Colonel Hawkins ultimately decided that Sarah's demonstrated capabilities outweighed the risks associated with her disciplinary history. But instead of simply recommending her for reassignment, she chose a more strategic approach that would provide additional opportunities to evaluate Sarah's potential while minimizing organizational risks. She arranged for Sarah to be assigned to a special project that would utilize her logistics expertise for developing improved procedures that could be tested and refined before being implemented more broadly. The special project involved analyzing logistics support requirements for a new type of distributed operations that were becoming increasingly important in modern military contexts. Traditional approaches to logistics were based on centralized supply systems that worked well for conventional operations, but were inadequate for the small unit, dispersed activities that characterized contemporary conflicts. The Marine Corps needed new approaches that could provide effective support for units operating independently across vast distances with minimal communication and transportation assets. Sarah's assignment to this project represented a significant opportunity to contribute meaningfully to important organizational challenges, but it also created new pressures and expectations that would test every aspect of her military development. She would be working directly with senior officers who had extensive combat experience and sophisticated understanding of operational requirements. Her recommendations would be scrutinized carefully and would potentially influence doctrine and procedures that could affect thousands of Marines in real-world situations. The project team was small and highly selective, composed of officers and senior enlisted personnel with specialized expertise in logistics, tactics, and operational planning. Sarah was by far the most junior member of the team, and her presence initially raised questions about whether someone with her limited experience could contribute meaningfully to such complex challenges. But Colonel Hawkins had specifically requested her inclusion based on her demonstrated ability to develop innovative solutions under pressure. The initial project meetings were intimidating for Sarah, who found herself discussing strategic concepts and operational requirements with Marines who had decades of experience in combat operations and senior leadership positions. But she quickly discovered that her tactical training and recent exercise experience provided valuable perspectives that complemented the broader strategic thinking of her more senior colleagues. Her understanding of practical implementation challenges helped ground theoretical discussions in operational reality. The project's central challenge was developing logistics, procedures that could function effectively when traditional supply chains were disrupted or unavailable. This required rethinking fundamental assumptions about how military units obtained and maintained critical resources. Instead of depending on regular resupply from centralized sources, distributed operations needed approaches that emphasized local procurement, creative resource utilization, and adaptive problem-solving that could function under highly variable conditions. Sarah's contributions to these discussions were initially tentative, but they gradually became more confident as she realized that her recent experience with crisis management provided relevant insights that senior team members valued. Her suggestions for decentralized supply catching, alternative communication protocols, and adaptive transportation planning aligned well with the operational requirements that the project was attempting to address. More importantly, her recommendations were based on practical experience rather than theoretical analysis. The project work was intellectually demanding in ways that Sarah found deeply satisfying after months of routine administrative tasks. She was finally able to utilize her analytical abilities and tactical training for challenges that could have meaningful impact on Marine Corps' effectiveness. The complexity of the strategic problems required exactly the kind of creative thinking and adaptive approach that had gotten her in trouble during boot camp, but had proven valuable during the recent exercise. But the project also revealed gaps in Sarah's knowledge and experience that needed to be addressed if she was going to contribute effectively to high-level planning processes. Her tactical understanding was solid, but she lacked the broader strategic perspective that came from years of diverse assignments and exposure to different operational environments. She needed to understand not just how individual operations functioned, but how they fit into larger strategic objectives and organizational priorities. Colonel Hawkins recognized these developmental needs and arranged for Sarah to participate in advanced training programs that would broaden her knowledge base and improve her qualifications for future assignments. These programs were typically reserved for Marines with much more experience and stronger leadership records, but Hawkins argued that Sarah's exceptional analytical abilities and demonstrated potential justified the investment in her professional development. The advanced training was challenging in entirely new ways that tested Sarah's intellectual capabilities rather than her physical endurance or tactical skills. She studied strategic planning, resource management, organizational leadership, and international relations with intensity that reflected her determination to prove herself worthy of the opportunity she was receiving. The coursework was demanding, but it provided the broader perspective she needed to understand how tactical innovations could support strategic objectives. Meanwhile, the special project was producing preliminary recommendations that were attracting attention from senior Marine Corps leadership. The team's proposed modifications to logistics doctrine represented significant departures from established procedures, but they were based on rigorous analysis and practical testing that demonstrated their potential effectiveness. Sarah's contributions had been instrumental in developing the practical implementation details that made the theoretical concepts operationally viable. The combination of advanced training and meaningful project work was transforming Sarah's understanding of her role within the Marine Corps and her potential for future contributions. She was beginning to see how her tactical capabilities could be developed into strategic expertise that could influence organizational effectiveness at much higher levels than she had previously imagined. But she was also aware that her continued advancement would depend on demonstrating consistent performance and professional development that could overcome the lingering effects of her disciplinary record. The opportunity to prove herself definitively came when the project team was asked to conduct a practical demonstration of their proposed logistics innovations. A major training exercise was being planned that would provide ideal conditions for testing the new approaches under realistic field conditions. The exercise would involve multiple battalions operating across diverse terrain types, with logistics support provided using the team's experimental procedures rather than traditional methods. Sarah was selected to serve as the primary logistics coordinator for the experimental portion of the exercise, a responsibility that placed her in direct command of significant resources and personnel. The assignment was both an extraordinary opportunity and a considerable risk. Success would validate both her personal capabilities and the innovative approaches she had helped develop. Failure would not only end her military career, but would also discredit the broader project that could have significant benefits for Marine Corps' operational effectiveness. The stakes could not have been higher as Sarah prepared for what would essentially be the final test of everything she had learned and developed since her problematic graduation from boot camp. Her performance during the upcoming exercise would determine whether she could overcome her disciplinary history and establish herself as a valuable contributor to Marine Corps' mission success, or whether she would remain forever limited by the consequences of a single tactical decision made. During her initial training, the Nevada desert stretched endlessly in all directions as Sarah Chun stood atop the observation tower at Exercise Phoenix Point, watching thousands of Marines prepare for what would become the most complex training operation in recent Marine Corps' history. The pre-dawn darkness was gradually giving way to the first hints of sunrise, casting long shadows across the assembly areas, where battalion-sized units were conducting final equipment checks and receiving last-minute briefings. Sarah's stomach churned with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety as she realized that within hours, she would be responsible for coordinating logistics support for an operation that could either validate months of innovative planning or expose fundamental flaws in her tactical thinking. The exercise parameters were deliberately challenging, designed to push both personnel and procedures to their absolute limits. 3 full battalions would operate independently across a training area that covered more than 800 square miles of some of the most unforgiving terrain in North America. Communication systems would be deliberately degraded to simulate battlefield conditions where traditional coordination methods might be unavailable. Supply lines would be extended to distances that strained conventional logistics capabilities. Most importantly, the exercise would test whether the experimental distributed logistics procedures that Sarah had helped develop could actually function under realistic operational stress. Colonel Hawkins had made it clear that this exercise represented more than just a training opportunity. Senior Marine Corps leadership would be observing closely, looking for innovations that could be incorporated into official doctrine and procedures. Military observers from other services and allied nations would be evaluating whether the experimental approaches had broader applications beyond Marine Corps operations. The success or failure of the logistics support would be scrutinized by experts who understood exactly how critical supply line management was to operational effectiveness in modern warfare. Sarah's role as primary logistics coordinator placed her at the center of this high-stakes evaluation. She would be responsible for managing a support network that included hundreds of vehicles, dozens of aircraft, thousands of tons of supplies, and hundreds of personnel spread across the vast training area. More importantly, she would have to make real-time decisions about resource allocation and priority management that could directly impact the safety and training effectiveness of thousands of Marines participating in the exercise. The experimental logistics approach that Sarah had helped design was fundamentally different from traditional military supply methods. Instead of relying on centralized supply points and regular scheduled deliveries, the new system emphasized pre-positioned caches. adaptive transportation networks, and decision-making authority distributed to forward logistics teams. The approach was theoretically superior to conventional methods, but it had never been tested at anything approaching this scale or complexity. The first phase of the exercise began with the kind of controlled chaos that characterized major military operations. Helicopter assets moved constantly across the training area, transporting personnel and equipment to initial positions while maintaining the operational security protocols that were essential for realistic training scenarios. Ground vehicles formed long convoys that snaked across desert roads, carrying the massive quantities of food, water, ammunition, and specialized equipment required to sustain thousands of Marines in a hostile environment for extended periods. Sarah found herself managing this complex choreography from the Forward Logistics Command Center, a sophisticated mobile facility that could relocate as operational requirements changed. The center was equipped with communication systems that could reach every unit in the training area, computer networks that tracked supply levels and consumption rates in real time, and display screens that provided comprehensive situational awareness of the entire logistics operation. But the technology was only as effective as the people using it, and Sarah quickly discovered that her most important tools were her tactical training and analytical thinking rather than the five electronic systems surrounding her. The first real test of the experimental logistics system came on the second day of the exercise when Battalion Landing Team Alpha encountered simulated enemy resistance that forced them to deviate significantly from their planned route. The unit found itself operating in terrain that was more difficult than anticipated, consuming supplies faster than expected, and requiring specialized equipment that hadn't been pre-positioned in their new operational area. Under traditional logistics procedures, this situation would have required extensive coordination with higher headquarters and potentially dangerous delays, while appropriate support was organized and transported. But the distributed logistics approach that Sarah had helped design was specifically intended to handle exactly this type of unexpected requirement. Instead of requesting support from centralized sources, Battalion Landing Team Alpha contacted the nearest forward logistics team and requested immediate assistance. Sarah's role was to coordinate between the requesting unit and the available support assets, ensuring that critical needs were met quickly while maintaining support for other operations that were continuing simultaneously. The solution required creative thinking and rapid adaptation that tested every aspect of Sarah's tactical training. The forward logistics team closest to Battalion Landing Team Alpha had adequate supplies but lacked the transportation assets needed to deliver them across the difficult terrain that the unit was now operating in. Meanwhile, a helicopter unit supporting another operation had surplus transportation capacity, but was located too far away to respond quickly. Sarah's challenge was to coordinate these separated resources in a way that would meet the urgent requirement without disrupting other critical operations. Her solution involved redirecting the helicopter assets to the forward logistics position, where they could pick up the needed supplies and deliver them directly to Battalion Landing Team Alpha's new location. This approach required modifying flight plans, adjusting fuel requirements, and coordinating timing across multiple units, but it allowed the urgent requirement to be met within acceptable timeframes. More importantly, the solution demonstrated the flexibility and responsiveness that the experimental logistics system was designed to provide. The success of this initial coordination effort established Sarah's credibility with the unit commanders, who were depending on logistics support for their training effectiveness. They began to understand that the experimental approach could provide capabilities that traditional methods couldn't match, but they also recognized that the system's effectiveness depended heavily on the tactical sophistication and decision-making ability of the personnel managing it. Sarah's performance during the first crisis had proven that she possessed the skills needed to make the innovative approach work under real operational stress. But the challenges continued to escalate as the exercise progressed and multiple units encountered simultaneous problems that tested the limits of available resources and coordination capabilities. On the fourth day, a simulated chemical attack forced Marine Air Ground Task Force Bravo to implement full decontamination procedures while continuing their assigned mission. The requirement for specialized decontamination equipment and additional medical supplies created immediate demands that hadn't been anticipated in the original planning. Simultaneously, Marine Expeditionary Unit Charlie was dealing with simulated equipment failures that required emergency replacement parts and maintenance support. The convergence of these multiple crises created exactly the kind of complex, rapidly evolving situation that could overwhelm traditional logistics systems and potentially compromise training safety. Sarah found herself managing competing priorities and resource constraints that required constant adaptation and creative problem-solving. Her decisions had to balance immediate tactical requirements against strategic resource allocation, ensuring that critical needs were met while maintaining sufficient reserves to handle additional unexpected problems. Her approach to managing this multifaceted crisis demonstrated the sophisticated tactical thinking that had been developing throughout her military career. Instead of trying to solve each problem independently, Sarah recognized the interconnected nature of the various requirements and developed an integrated response that addressed multiple needs simultaneously. She coordinated a complex series of asset movements that delivered decontamination equipment to Marine Air Ground Task Force Bravo while repositioning maintenance teams to support Marine Expeditionary Unit Charlie. Most importantly, she accomplished this coordination without disrupting ongoing support for other units that were continuing their training activities. The effectiveness of Sarah's crisis management during this critical period caught the attention of Major General Patricia Morrison, the senior exercise observer who had extensive combat experience and deep understanding of logistics challenges. In real-world operations, Morrison had been skeptical of the experimental approaches being tested during the exercise, preferring proven methods that had been refined through decades of operational experience. But Sarah's performance during the multiple simultaneous crises demonstrated capabilities that impressed even experienced skeptics. Morrison's direct observation of Sarah's decision-making process revealed the sophisticated analytical framework that guided her tactical choices. Sarah wasn't simply reacting to problems as they arose, but was anticipating potential complications and positioning resources to handle multiple contingencies. Her understanding of operational requirements was combined with detailed knowledge of available assets and transportation capabilities that allowed her to develop solutions that maximized effectiveness while minimizing risks and resource consumption. But Morrison also noticed something else that was potentially even more significant than Sarah's tactical capabilities. Her approach to crisis management emphasized collaboration and communication that built confidence and trust among the unit commanders who depended on logistic support. Instead of issuing orders from a centralized command position, Sarah was constantly consulting with field personnel and incorporating their insights into her planning processes. This collaborative approach created a level of coordination and mutual support that enhanced overall operational effectiveness. The most severe test of both Sarah's capabilities and the experimental logistics system came on the 7th day of the exercise when a realistic simulation of combat casualties created immediate requirements for medical evacuation and trauma care that pushed available resources to their absolute limits. The scenario involved multiple casualties spread across different locations, with some requiring immediate evacuation, while others needed specialized medical treatment that could be provided in forward positions. The challenge was complicated by degraded communication systems and transportation assets that were already committed to supporting other critical operations. Sarah's response to this medical crisis demonstrated not only her tactical expertise, but also her understanding of the human elements that were often overlooked in purely technical approaches to logistics management. She recognized that the speed and effectiveness of medical support could have profound psychological impacts on all Marines participating in the exercise, affecting their confidence in the logistics system and their willingness to take the tactical risks that realistic training required. Her decisions had to balance medical requirements against operational needs while maintaining the trust and confidence that were essential for continued training effectiveness. The solution she developed involved coordinating medical assets from multiple sources while establishing temporary treatment facilities that could provide specialized care closer to operational areas. This approach required redirecting personnel and equipment from other activities, but it ensured that simulated casualties received appropriate care without compromising ongoing training activities. More importantly, her coordination efforts demonstrated to all participating units that the logistics system could respond effectively to the most serious challenges they might encounter. The medical evacuation exercise was observed closely by Colonel James Wright, the Marine Corps' senior medical logistics officer, who had been invited specifically to evaluate whether the experimental approaches could handle the specialized requirements of combat medical support. Wright had extensive experience with medical logistics in real combat situations and understood exactly how critical effective coordination could be for saving lives and maintaining unit effectiveness under extreme stress. Wright's assessment of Sarah's performance during the medical crisis was unequivocally positive. Her coordination of medical assets had been more effective than conventional approaches would have achieved under similar circumstances. But more importantly, her understanding of medical requirements and her ability to integrate medical support with broader logistics operations demonstrated exactly the kind of sophisticated thinking that the Marine Corps needed for modern combat. Operations where traditional boundaries between different types of support were increasingly irrelevant. The success of the medical evacuation exercise created momentum that carried through the remainder of the training operation. Units that had initially been skeptical of the experimental logistics approaches began to recognize their advantages and to modify their own procedures to take advantage of the enhanced capabilities. Sarah found herself coordinating increasingly complex operations that tested the limits of the distributed logistics system while demonstrating its potential for supporting operations that would have been impossible under traditional approaches. The final phase of the exercise involved a large-scale, amphibious assault simulation that required coordinating logistics support across sea, land, and air domains simultaneously. The complexity of this operation exceeded anything that Sarah had previously managed, requiring her to integrate maritime shipping, helicopter operations, ground transportation, and forward positioning in a seamless system that could adapt to rapidly changing tactical situations. The coordination challenges were compounded by realistic communications, disruptions, and equipment failures that tested every aspect of the experimental logistics procedures. Sarah's management of this culminating operation demonstrated the full extent of her development as a logistics professional and tactical leader. Her coordination was virtually flawless, ensuring that thousands of Marines had the supplies and support they needed while maintaining operational security and safety standards that met the highest military requirements. But perhaps more importantly, her leadership during this complex operation earned the respect and confidence of senior officers who recognized that her capabilities extended far beyond routine logistics management. Major General Morrison's final assessment of the exercise focused particularly on Sarah's role in demonstrating the viability of the experimental logistics approaches. Her performance had not only validated the theoretical concepts but had also shown how they could be implemented effectively by personnel with appropriate training and tactical understanding. Morrison's report to Marine Corps headquarters specifically recommended that Sarah be considered for advanced training and leadership positions, that would allow her capabilities to be utilized more effectively. But the most significant recognition came from an unexpected source. Brigadier General Elena Rodriguez, the Marine Corps' Deputy Commandant for Logistics, had been following the exercise closely and had reviewed detailed analyses of Sarah's performance throughout the training operation. Rodriguez was known for her rigorous standards and her skepticism of innovations that hadn't been proven under realistic conditions. Her personal interest in Sarah's career development represented an extraordinary opportunity for advancement that could transform Sarah's military trajectory. The meeting between Sarah and General Rodriguez took place 3 days after the exercise concluded, in a conference room that still carried the controlled chaos atmosphere of the operation that had just ended. Rodriguez was direct in her assessment, acknowledging both Sarah's exceptional performance during the exercise and the disciplinary issues that had marked her early military career. But she was more interested in Sarah's potential for future contributions than in relitigating past problems. Rodriguez explained that the Marine Corps was facing complex logistics challenges that required exactly the kind of innovative thinking and tactical sophistication that Sarah had demonstrated during the exercise. Traditional approaches to logistics support were proving inadequate for the distributed operations and rapid deployment requirements that characterized modern military conflicts. The service needed officers who could develop and implement new approaches while maintaining the reliability and effectiveness that operational success demanded. The opportunity that Rodriguez presented was both extraordinary and demanding. Sarah would be assigned to the Marine Corps' Logistics Command Headquarters, where she would work directly with senior planners developing doctrine and procedures for future operations. The assignment would involve extensive travel, exposure to classified, strategic planning processes, and responsibility for training and development programs that could influence thousands of Marines. But it would also require demonstrated leadership and professional development that could overcome any lingering concerns about her disciplinary history. The assignment came with immediate promotion to Staff Sergeant, recognizing both her exceptional performance and the increased responsibilities she would be assuming. But Rodriguez made it clear that this advancement was conditional on continued excellence and professional growth that would justify the Marine Corps' investment in her development. Future promotions and assignments would depend on her ability to maintain the high standards she had demonstrated during the exercise while developing the broader leadership capabilities required for senior positions. Sarah's acceptance of this assignment marked a fundamental transformation in her military career and her understanding of her role within the Marine Corps. She was no longer fighting to overcome past mistakes or prove her basic competence. Instead, she was being recognized as someone whose capabilities could contribute significantly to organizational effectiveness and strategic success. The disciplinary action from boot camp, while still part of her official record, had been overshadowed by demonstrated performance that proved her value to the Marine Corps' mission. The transition to her new assignment at Marine Corps' Logistics Command Headquarters was both exciting and intimidating. Sarah found herself working alongside officers with decades of experience and advanced education in strategic planning and organizational management. Her colleagues included graduates of prestigious military schools and advanced civilian universities, individuals whose backgrounds and qualifications initially made her feel inadequate despite her recent successes. But Sarah quickly discovered that her combination of tactical experience and innovative thinking provided perspectives that complemented the more traditional approaches favored by her colleagues. Her understanding of how logistics systems actually functioned under field conditions grounded theoretical discussions in operational reality. Her experience with crisis management and adaptive problem-solving offered insights that purely academic approaches sometimes missed. Most importantly, her recent success with experimental procedures gave her credibility When advocating for innovations that might have been dismissed if proposed by someone without proven field experience. The projects that Sarah was assigned involved developing training programs that would prepare Marines for the complex logistics challenges they would face in future operations. Her responsibility was to translate the lessons learned from Exercise Phoenix Point into standardized procedures that could be taught effectively to personnel throughout the Marine Corps. This required not only understanding the technical details of the experimental approaches, but also developing instructional methods that could convey the tactical thinking and decision-making processes that made them effective. The training program development was intellectually challenging in ways that utilized all of Sarah's analytical capabilities while requiring her to develop new skills in curriculum design and instructional leadership. She had to understand not only how to perform complex logistics coordination, but also how to teach others to develop the same capabilities. This transition from tactical execution to strategic education represented a significant expansion of her professional responsibilities and capabilities. But the most significant aspect of her new role was the opportunity to influence Marine Corps doctrine and procedures that would affect operations for years to come. The experimental logistics approaches that had been tested during Exercise Phoenix Point were being incorporated into official training programs and operational procedures. Sarah's insights and recommendations were being integrated into guidance that would influence how thousands of Marines approach logistics challenges in real-world situations. The recognition of her contributions to this doctrinal development came in an unexpected form when Sarah was selected to present the experimental logistics concepts at the annual Marine Corps Logistics Symposium, a gathering of senior officers and civilian experts who influenced service-wide policies and procedures. Her presentation would be attended by general officers, defense contractors, and academic researchers who would evaluate the broader applicability of the innovations she had helped develop. The symposium presentation represented both a tremendous professional opportunity and a significant personal challenge for Sarah. She would be addressing an audience whose experience and expertise far exceeded her own, presenting concepts that challenged established procedures and conventional thinking. Her credibility would depend not only on the technical merits of her recommendations, but also on her ability to articulate complex ideas clearly and persuasively to skeptical audiences. Sarah's preparation for the symposium involved months of detailed analysis and coordination with colleagues who helped refine her presentation and anticipate potential questions and criticisms. But the core of her presentation remained grounded in the practical experience and tactical insights that had made her effective during Exercise Phoenix Point. She was not advocating for theoretical improvements, but for proven innovations that had demonstrated their effectiveness under realistic operational conditions. The symposium presentation itself was a remarkable success that exceeded even Sarah's optimistic expectations. Her clear explanation of the experimental procedures, combined with detailed analysis of their effectiveness during the exercise, convinced skeptical audiences that the innovations represented genuine improvements over traditional approaches. But perhaps more importantly, her presentation demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking and professional competence that marked her as someone capable of contributing at the highest levels of Marine Corps leadership. The positive reception of her symposium presentation led to additional opportunities for professional development and increased responsibilities within Marine Corps Logistics Command. Sarah found herself involved in strategic planning processes that influenced resource allocation and operational priorities across the entire service. Her recommendations were being incorporated into budget requests and equipment acquisition, programs that would affect Marine Corps' capabilities for decades to come. But the most personally satisfying recognition came when Sarah received notification that she had been selected for promotion to gunnery sergeant, a significant advancement that reflected not only her recent accomplishments, but also the Marine Corps' confidence in her potential for continued leadership and professional growth. The promotion ceremony was attended by senior officers who had observed her development from a disciplined boot camp graduate to a recognized expert in logistics, innovation, and strategic planning. The ceremony also marked another significant milestone in Sarah's career when Brigadier General Rodriguez announced that Sarah had been selected for advanced education at the Marine Corps Command and Staff College, one of the service's most prestigious professional development programs. The selection represented recognition that Sarah possessed the intellectual capabilities and leadership potential required for senior command positions. But it also reflected the Marine Corps' investment in developing officers who could address the complex challenges of modern military operations. As Sarah stood in formation during the promotion ceremony, wearing the distinctive chevrons that marked her new rank, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from the disciplinary review board at Parris Island to recognition as a rising leader in Marine Corps logistics. The disciplinary action that had once seemed to end her military aspirations had actually taught her valuable lessons about the importance of balancing innovation with discipline, individual initiative with organizational requirements. The ceremony concluded with an unexpected announcement that demonstrated how completely Sarah's reputation had been transformed. Major General Morrison, who had observed her performance during Exercise Phoenix Point, announced that Sarah had been selected to lead the development of the Marine Corps' new Distributed Logistics Training Center, a facility that would prepare Marines for the complex supply challenges they would face in future operations. The assignment represented both recognition of her expertise and confidence in her ability to shape the professional development of future marine logistics leaders. The announcement of Sarah's selection for this leadership position created a moment of profound satisfaction that transcended personal achievement. She realized that her journey from disciplinary action to professional recognition had created opportunities not only for her own advancement, but also for contributing to the success and effectiveness of thousands of Marines who would benefit from improved training and procedures. Her individual struggle against the constraints of established thinking had evolved into institutional changes that could enhance organizational capabilities for generations. The reception that followed the ceremony provided opportunities for Sarah to reconnect with Marines who had influenced her development at different stages of her career. Gunnery Sergeant Torres, her former supervisor from the logistics office, expressed pride in her advancement and acknowledged that his initial skepticism about her potential had been completely wrong. Colonel Hawkins, who had first recognized her tactical capabilities, congratulated her on demonstrating that exceptional individual performance could indeed translate into institutional leadership and strategic impact. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from a group of junior Marines who had participated in the training programs that Sarah had developed. Their testimonials about how her innovations had improved their capabilities and confidence demonstrated that her contributions were having practical impact on the Marines who would implement logistics support in real-world operations. Their success validated not only her technical expertise, but also her ability to translate complex concepts into effective training that enhanced operational readiness. As the evening concluded and Sarah prepared to begin her new responsibilities, she understood that her career had evolved far beyond her initial aspirations of simply overcoming disciplinary challenges and proving her basic competence. She had become someone whose innovations and leadership were influencing Marine Corps' capabilities at strategic levels. But more importantly, she had demonstrated that individual determination and tactical excellence could indeed contribute to organizational success when channeled through appropriate professional development and institutional support. The lights of the base reflected off the California mountains as Sarah walked to her quarters, wearing her new rank and carrying responsibility for training programs that would affect thousands of Marines. Her journey from disciplinary action to strategic leadership had proven that exceptional performance could overcome early setbacks when combined with continued learning and adaptation. The Marine Corps had ultimately benefited from her determination to prove herself worthy of the uniform she had nearly lost during boot camp. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.